Welcome to Relative Mentality. I'm Jack,
And I'm Joe.
and we are not here to be therapists. We're here to be family. And this episode is going to be a heavy one, but we figured why not really just why dip toes it when you can just jump fully in?
Jump in, dive in. Don't be afraid of the deep end, my friend.
Yes.
Okay, so grief today is a big topic for me. And so I just want to sort of give a bit of a disclaimer before we begin. There's going to be a lot of, I'm not sure 100% how this is going to go because there's going to be a lot of hard things we're going to talk about. And I imagine it's going to feel quite emotional. But I just want our listeners to know, people who are joining us to know that this is our choice. This is my choice specifically, but also, obviously Jack's on board to sort of talk about this really tough subject. And I'm sure there are ways where maybe it could seem exploitative, but at the end of the day, I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation because I think it's going to be good for me to process some of these things and have a chance to talk with someone who I love and is amazing and always a great ear for me about some of these grief pieces that aren't always discussed. So even though it's going to be really hard, I'm going into it 100% choosing to do this, not just trying to do this for you guys to hear my sob story, but also for me to have a space to sort of reflect on some of these things and have a chance to share with Jack some of this as well.
And I think it's safe to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like it can come off as potentially like self-serving or masturbatory or whatever, but it's more of a
Yeah.
just because these things don't exactly relate to whomever is listening doesn't mean that there aren't little flecks here and there that they can relate to.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of this podcast in general is just to open discussions. We're kind of
Yeah.
not in a self-serving way of leading the way, but just kind of saying like this is what we've gone through and maybe see how that relates to what you've gone through. And if there's anything that can connect, then I love that. And if not, that's okay too. So yeah, I know there's a handful of things that I'm going to talk about that are not easy. And it's one of those things that ultimately, if it gets too hard, it can get edited out. And so we are fully cognizant of the choices that we're making here in sharing some of these super hard and super difficult topics.
Personal
Yeah.
topics and stories. But that's definitely something I have noticed as I've been on social media and sharing stuff to do with mental health. When I sit and I talk to people about like, here are coping skills you can use. Yeah, those videos get views, they get likes, people sometimes interact with them. But when I really sit and I'm just like, grief sucks, and let me tell you why my grief is so hard and it sucks right now, those are the videos that people are saving. Those are the videos people are reposting. Those are the videos that people are interacting with and that are getting the most amount of views that I have. I'm not trying to be like, I'm an influencer and I'm getting like 8 billion views or something. But, again, that's what people engage with the most. And so that's again part of why I brought this to the table to do it this way today, is because I'm hoping, our transparency can give some space for people who are like, yes, grief sucks. And I totally get what they're saying. It's not my experience, but I'm being affected or I'm reacting or I'm vibing in that same way.
Absolutely.
So I guess we say all that to say this. So my mom, Jack's aunt, passed away May 2nd, 2024. We are actually recording this on Mother's Day, 2025, which is a year and a week after the anniversary of her 1 year. And there was a lot of grief in the situation with my mom. She was diagnosed with leukemia, AML, which is one of all cancer, leukemias is terrible, but this is one of the more difficult ones to treat. And when she found out, they kind of were like, oh, crap, this is already kind of far along. And so she was hospitalized to get intensive treatment within like a couple weeks of them finding her diagnosis. And so it all came very quickly. None of us were prepared. And at the time, they were really telling us, like, it could be weeks. Yeah, that was very difficult in and of itself, right? Like learning about it. And this was in December of 2022. I was getting married in September of 23. And so now I'm like asking myself all these questions, like, is my mom even going to be at my wedding? Like, is my mom going to be there for anything, right? So starting to struggle with the grief before it's even happened, the loss of my mom, but struggling with that grief of she might not be there for fill in the blank. I bring up the wedding thing as being especially difficult because my mother made wedding cakes, and she's made wedding cakes for a lot of people in our family. She's made a couple for your mom. Ooh. Ooh. She's made a couple for a couple people, but she makes
True.
wedding cakes. A lot of our cousins had her make their wedding cakes. And so that was something I always dreamed about. My mom was going to make my wedding cake. She made cakes for all my brothers, and I'm like, she's going to make my wedding cake. And so just the idea of like, there's no way my mom can make my cake because she's got a terminal illness and she's struggling like that, even though the cake is whatever at the end of the day. But like that idea I had about my mom being able to provide that, being able to have that really special component from my mom. Yeah, that was so sorry. I don't.
So respectfully,
Yeah.
stop. I'm gonna smack you across the screen because the cake is not a little thing. And I don't want you to even use that diminishing language in relation to that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I know that's aggressive language for that, but it's one of those things that, it's cake, sure. But on top of it, I'm going to relate it to something that seems very unrelated, but I promise it is. My mom, when we were little, would make my sister and I peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And we'd always ask if it was made with love. And what that meant is that she would take a knife and put a heart in the peanut butter and then put the jelly. It's a fucking sandwich. And I can use that language, but that's
Yeah.
not what it was. Your mother,
Mhm.
sure, made 1,000 because there's a million of us, wedding cakes, but it was the love that was going to be in it. Because yeah,
Yeah.
okay, you can get a fucking cake from a Publix or a Kroger or a Giant Eagle, wherever the fuck you live, a grocery store. You can get a cake from there. That's not the same as first of all, someone hand making it. And secondly, your mother put love into everything. And so
Yeah.
it wouldn't have just been cake. It would have been cake your mother made. That's
Mhm.
why I say I'm gonna slap you. If you're like, I get it's cake. And I'm
Well,
like, no, it's more than cake.
well, and that, and I'm thinking of you saying this, and it's true. We ended up having a reception in 2024 for our family, and Jack, you made our cake using some of my mom's cake pans and tools. That was truly beautiful and amazing, and something we didn't expect for you to do. But you're right. It like even that was much more than just a cake that you made us. That was a memorial for my mom. It was you showing us your love for us and the effort you're willing to put in and all of those things. So you're right, cake in this instance is not just cake. It is much more than that. It is cake plus. You're right. Thank you for challenging me on my cake talk. But those are the sort of things those are the sort of things that, go through your head. Like my
Mhm.
mom was going to be in treatment, so she wasn't going to be able to come to Chicago to look at wedding dresses with me. I didn't know if my mom was going to make it to my wedding. Also, how am I going to plan a wedding if I'm grieving my mom? I didn't know, like, it was wild. And when she was first diagnosed, I went down there and I stayed for 5.5 weeks, stayed with her husband while she was in the hospital. And then she got out, and I was staying with her for a while. And so it totally turned my life upside down in so many ways. Just the illness part before we even get to the actual passing, like just the idea of the illness, caring for her through the illness. And it also affected our relationship too, because I told her, you're going to hear us, Jack and I talk about this a lot, but our family is very much keep it to yourself, or like, I don't need to tell people about my struggles. And we see that a lot with our aunts and uncles. If they're getting sick or something, we don't find out until it's already over, or something like that. And so My mom had always been that way, even with me. And that was a big thing. I basically told her, you have to change our relationship because I need you to tell me the truth. I need you to
Mm.
tell me when you're sick. I need you to be honest with me in all those ways. And so I think there was some grief for her in that way too, like the grief of the way our relationship looked, or the fact that I was there caring for them, helping them get up, do things, make their meals, all of those things. And she was like, I'm the mom. You're not supposed to be doing all of this. So I think there was grief for her too, and in the change in our relationship had to take or did take because of the illness. So for anyone wondering, I was blessed enough that my mom was able to come to our wedding. She was in remission at that point, was doing really well. But then it came back as it does. Yeah, it when we look at the whole thing, it was only like a year and a half, 2 years. It wasn't very long at all. They tried a couple different treatments, and from the time that they figured out that the treatments weren't working for my mom to the time that she actually passed was only like basically 2 weeks exactly. It was so fast. But that palliative stage was so, I will never regret my decision to take care of my mom during that time. And if I hadn't, I think I would be very upset that I hadn't had that time with her. But it was so hard. I watched my mom die day by day, little by little. And there were some things that were very obvious about it. There are other things that weren't. I'm trying to think how to say this. It was weird because I was there caring for my mom, but there were all these other people coming in to visit her, and they had their grief, right? They had their concern for my mom and their loss and their relationship with her. But I think what was hardest for me was that it wasn't just me and my mom and my grief and my relationship with her. It was also managing all of these other people,
I wanted to
which
be like,
again,
just like, get the fuck out. You can grieve elsewhere. I am busy taking
yes.
care of her. Let me grieve and deal with her. Like, that
Yeah,
is,
but that's like classic Stewart woman though, right? Like that's
oh,
so a woman in
100%.
her family to just like, I'm gonna take on everybody else's grief. And I'm like, I was still working virtually and like taking care of mom and trying to organize everybody coming to visit. There was all her brothers and sisters, having time for them to come visit and stuff, managing my brothers coming to visit, not trying to overwhelm my mom. Like it was one of the, it wasn't difficult. Like none of it was something that was like asking me to do something that I'd be like, wow, this is so difficult. But it was just stressful because of all of the moving pieces that came with it and all of these different grief journeys intersecting at this one point where I was living and trying to care for this woman.
One thing I wanted to pose out there, which I don't know if this will be helpful or hurtful, and I hope it's the former, not the latter, but I'd be curious if when you were like, I need you to be honest with me, I need you to, have these conversations on doing better, doing worse, if there was some grief that she went through of losing a child, because at that point you were no longer her child, but you
Yeah.
are her caretaker. And I bet that was hard for her.
Yeah, that change in dynamic. And it wasn't something that she was ready for. And also that she's just the caregiver, right?
Yeah.
She's very much a matriarch within our family, and she cared for her husband like she was a nurse practitioner. She worked with people in palliative care. She is the caregiver. So having to be in a position where she no longer could be, or we weren't maybe even weren't allowing her to be in some ways, I think was really hard. And especially with her sisters, I think she kind of was okay about it when her sisters were there caring for her. There was definitely grief for her when I was there doing the caretaking because, yeah, it was like a loss of a child, a loss of her independence, that shift in dynamics. I think that was, yeah, very difficult for her. And, talking about her as a caregiver, like it was the last things I heard her say when she was in hospice care was asking her stepdaughters about, one of their daughters was about to graduate. And so she was like asking questions about graduation and what is she doing. So even in this moment where my mom is literally on her deathbed, and we didn't know at that moment, but this is going to be like one of the last times she's going to be awake to even be able to speak. She was asking questions about the grandkid and how everybody else was doing. She is the epitome of caretaker, caregiver. Losing that, I know, was definitely a source of grief and strain for her, for sure. As I'm talking about the day she was in hospice care, it kind of brings me to some of the stuff like our family and seeing all the different ways people grieve. Something that our family does. They did it for grandma and they basically did it for my mom, which is on that last day while they're on their deathbed, like everybody shows up. This hospice was not prepared. And so, most people have like maybe top 6 people that come and see them. On that last day, there was anywhere from 20 to 30 people. There was constantly people there from the time we got there in the morning till everybody left at like midnight. There were so many people there. And again, it was strange because despite us all being family, there was a lot of different ways of grief happening, from the being jovial and trying to joke to one of our aunts was like, I can tell she can hear me. I'm just going to sit here and talk to her, to trying to figure out the priest to come to do her last rites, and her grandchildren, struggling to see her in that way. To me, who was like, I almost like performing, right? There's like a performative piece of like, well, I'm still sort of in charge and I got to make sure everybody's okay and make sure that we have chairs for everyone and that we're figuring some kind of food out for people to eat. So there was even a part of that where like I had to put my grief aside, or felt I had to put my grief aside in those moments to sort of facilitate and support everybody else's grief. And so, sorry, I'm just thinking,
No, you're great. You're great.
this is the whole journey with my mom. And even, we sort of got to the 1 year, which was last Friday, and I didn't know what it was going to be like. And I think I was a little surprised that it wasn't more dysregulating, but it wasn't. It wasn't as dysregulating as I thought it was going to be. It didn't spiral in the way that I thought I might. So it's good, but it also just speaks of the like complicated nature of grief, in that we just can't ever really know what that experience is going to look like. And it even affects my sort of quote unquote role in our family, right? My role in my immediate family and the way that has changed. And this has given me, I had to learn a lot about myself to support her through this and to process my grief after this. I also had to make some changes about how I was looking at our family and about how I was going to interact and what pressure I was going to put on myself in those situations. So yeah, there are many stages of this grief, and it's not over. There was the illness stage, there was a palliative stage, there was the actual loss stage, and now there's sort of like this post, we call it AM, after mom sort of time where there's again a totally different grief that sort of comes with it. Sorry, I just rambled a lot about my mom.
No, I mean, that's a lot, and it's a lot to take in. Like, I am very fortunate to still have my mom, and I dread the day that I know that I will not have her anymore.
Well, and
And
we
so,
should say too, like in our family, of the aunts and uncles, there was an uncle who died when he was a baby. There was an uncle
mhm,
who died in the early 90s.
mhm.
And then that was it. And so my mom was the first like person in our family who wasn't like one of the older generations to pass in 30 years. So it I think it was a weird experience for the entire family, that it sort of was necessarily a marker of things to come, but like this was the first big loss in a long time that was like to this level.
And on top of it, a thing to point out is, out of the original children, she's not the oldest child. And so it's one
No.
of those things that even on a logical, chronological order, she would not be the first one to go per se. But to your point about how people don't talk about things, if my understanding of the timeline is correct, when we all met up for our family pictures a couple years ago, 3 different aunts and uncles, one of them was your mother, had some sort of cancer or something of that adjacent in that picture that nobody knew about. Because I don't think your mom
Yeah.
had told anybody. And there's
She didn't know yet. She was going to the
mm,
doctors to see, and they were like, something's wrong, but we can't figure out what it is because
mm,
other than the cancer, she was healthy. And so she actually had COVID, is why she wasn't there for those pictures.
mm.
But that's why she missed that day. But yeah, she definitely had it, but she didn't know at that point. And I don't think the other two you were talking about, I don't think they
One did for sure.
really.
Yeah.
The
Anyways,
tea, the
the
tea
tea.
indeed.
Oh yeah.
I mean, but on that note, once my mom was sort of in this position where she was terminal and like having to go through these pretty serious treatments, that was it. Nobody else in the family talked about any of their illnesses. And so there was cancer scares, and they basically, I didn't hear about any of them until they were done,
Oh
because
yeah.
basically been like, I don't want to take the torch from your mom, or like, I want everybody to be looking at your mom and thinking of her and worrying for her and not be
Right.
looking at me or worrying for me. And one of
Right.
them was taking care of my mom.
Yep.
She was
Uh-huh.
literally taking care of my mom while also
Hmm.
struggling with secretly or quietly at least with her own cancer. But that's exactly it. That is just classic our family to just sort of put it off. And what is fun, like years ago, my mom had been hospitalized and I knew she had been sick. This was before the cancer. This was like a pneumonia that got infected sort of thing. And it was like a year later and she was like, yeah, when I almost died last year. And I'm like, you almost died last year? Oh, yeah, when I went to the hospital. You never told me that. You never told me that your hospital stay was for something that serious, right? So I
Right.
already have these experiences with my mom where she is not giving me all of the information. I have these experiences with everybody in our family where we are not getting all of the information about health and stuff, even when grandma was sick. And so when we got to this point, I was like, that is the one thing I will not stand for during this. You need to be honest with me about your health and about what's going on in real time, because if
Right.
not, when you do die, I'm gonna pull your ghost back down and give her a slapsy. I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna get you and I'll make you sorry. And I think it was really difficult for her to do. And I especially know still with her brothers and sisters in the larger family, it was definitely difficult to do. So it's something she really had to push and challenge herself to even be honest with people about what was really going on with her. So is that the only loss in my life? No, but it's very significant and it's definitely the most intense grief and loss journey that I have had. And, there are ways that maybe you are blessed and that your parents are both still here, physically alive on that phase.
Are
I'm
you looking
sorry.
at that segue? Is that where we're going with it?
I mean, a little bit if you're open
Sure.
to it.
Sure. Well, I just didn't want to take away from what you were experiencing and what you were talking about and all that.
No, I
Mm.
I think, I think I've said my piece on just the like what is my grief and what am I dealing with. So yeah, I was trying to do a sort of smooth but obviously very awkward segue into, maybe you sharing about,
Sure, 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 sure.
if you insist.
So,
I can. Okay, okay, okay.
no, 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 no. Yeah. It's funny because it's funny in a not so funny way. Your significant grief is tied around someone who has passed. And like we'll talk about in the next episode, what is quote unquote acceptable grief versus not acceptable grief per societal expectations,
Mm,
and one of which is loss of someone actually passing. I, on the other hand, and this will be hard for me, and it's silly, and I'm saying that to try to diminish it just so that it's easier for me to talk about, fully knowing that my
yeah.
feelings are valid. My father is very much so still alive, and I went no contact with him as of Father's Day last year. And there are reasons that I don't necessarily want to really get into at the moment, but one thing that I've had to explain even to his mother, who very much so is also alive, and I am not in contact with her. Obviously, me talking to her son doesn't make any sense.
Mm,
Going no contact with someone is not an easy thing, especially with
mm,
it being someone like a parent. And there was kind of two stages of grief that I had with him. And again, I'm going to do the best that I can to talk about it without talking about it to some degree. But growing up, your parents, at least how I was raised, and I feel like a lot of people are raised, our parents are somewhat infallible.
mm,
And I was fortunate enough in a fucked up way to look at it like this, where the facade of being infallible slowly got chipped away in different instances. But that was really hard every time because, on top of it, with it being a parent, there is this idea of unconditional love.
mhm,
And when you start to feel that it is conditional, it is very hard and it is a very unfortunate thing. And so there was the whole every time something got chipped away with the facade of him being an infallible parent, that sucked. To some degree, there were instances, and I say this with a smile because, like, my childhood as a whole was not exactly pristine. There's a lot of grievances that I have with that. But when I think it was when I turned 28, I think my parents had me when they were 28 years old. I was like, I'm barely keeping myself alive. So they did the best that they could when
Yeah.
they had me. And so there was that aspect of losing a facade that it was actually kind of almost healing in a way, because I was like, oh, that's actually quite nice. Like, I'm just like, oh, God bless them. I'm barely keeping myself alive at that age. And yet, they're working their jobs, they're trying to keep an infant alive. Like, and our family is so fucking large that it really is its own village. So, like, thank God for that. So there are some parts of losing the son that was like actually kind of healing, but a lot of it was very painful. And I know that it's kind of fucked up that we're like recording this and I'm closing my eyes a lot, but it's sometimes easier for me to like say truthful things without looking.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
the second stage of that was when I officially went no contact, because there is such a finality in doing that. And so explaining to his mother, my grandmother, that when she was very upset with me, obviously she didn't understand, or she didn't know my side of the story when it happened. And then that first phone call that I had afterward, and explaining some of the things and some of the feelings that I had, that made it a little bit easier for her to understand. When I got married, he wasn't there. That's kind of a hard thing to explain to people, especially when he hasn't passed. Like, well, where's your dad? And then I have to constantly relive that he's not here, even though he should be, type of thing.
Mhm.
And it's also hard as well, to some degree, with the whole losing the facade part of it, because when, like, I know comparison is never good, especially with mental health work, with everything else. But when I met my partner's dad, his dad was so welcoming and so just kind and all of these good things. But it made me realize things were like not great on the other end, because it was like at one point my partner's dad texted me baby pictures of him and said, I was going down memory lane and thought you might want that. You might want to see it. I had never gotten anything like that from my own dad. And so, like, that was a part of the
Mm.
facade as well, where it was like this person who barely knows me and has come in and accepted me almost immediately is
Yeah.
giving me things that are, ascribed to being a dad. And I've just never gotten that before. And then also having, like, even as I'm talking about it, having these things in my head being like, oh my dad would be like, well, I did X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, I need to know what I felt in these moments. And it's hard too, because I mean, obviously a lot of our family knows my dad. He was around for a minute. And so, the people that came to the wedding, there needed to be a kind of a briefing of like, by the way, this person's not going to be there, so don't ask about it. And so there's a lot of complications within that. And it's so frustrating, because it's like I have gone through a lot emotionally that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. Like, unless you've had to cut someone out of your life, it's something that won't make sense to other people, because it's like there's always the, well, but that's your dad, or but that's your person. And I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Like, it's not in a dismissive way for that person, but it's almost like, don't you dare dismiss what I have felt and what I've had to go through. Like, I shouldn't have to explain every single thing and every single reason that I had to come to terms with to make this decision for you to be okay with validating my grief. And that has been an
Yeah.
incredibly frustrating aspect, because it's just like, I'm going to say this because humor and whatever. It's easy because your mom's dead. People could be like, that really sucks. And that, I
Yeah.
mean, they've had someone die
No
in their
more
life.
question, right?
Right. They're
My
like, they'll
mom's
feel
dead.
shitty about it.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, but your dad's not dead, but you just aren't talking to him. And I'm like, when you say it's like that, it sounds like I'm a teenager just crossing my arms and being like, this has been 30 years of buildup. There has
Yeah.
been a lot of second chances and third chances, whether or not those have been explicitly stated. And each of those times that those chances were given and then pretty much just spit upon. Yeah, I feel like I'm potentially talking in a very cyclical way, and I apologize, but it's my brain, to some degree, because it hasn't fully been a year yet that I've gone no contact. It's still fresh, just like
Mm.
with your mom. Like, there's still things you're experiencing with that and whatever else. There were a handful of things where it was like Thanksgiving, was the first Thanksgiving where I didn't get a happy Thanksgiving text from him. Same with
Mm.
Christmas because I blocked him. I was afraid my birthday was going to be similar. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but it did get a little hard when my grandma called because then it was like, okay, his mom's calling me. But again, I still talk to her. So that's not unexpected, but it still was just kind of like a reminder of like, yeah, he's not going to be calling you. He's not going to be texting you. Definitely was easier, but we will see what happens on Father's Day, how
Yeah.
that's going to go about. But anyways, now I've been talking a lot.
Well, and you really challenged me earlier, and I want to challenge you a little bit now, and not maybe not even challenge you, but just really validate your feelings because we do have to come to peace with the fact that our parents aren't who we thought they were or wanted them to be, but are the humans and some crappy humans that they are. That doesn't mean we have to excuse their behaviors, right? Because, like you said, there are lots of chances, especially when we become adults, to quote unquote make up for those things. But at the end of the day, we also have to remember you don't have to be in a relationship that's not serving you. And you shouldn't be serving a relationship that's not serving you. Putting all of this time and energy and trying to fix things and trying to make things better and not getting that same energy and consideration back isn't right. I know this has been a struggle for you, all of this. And I'm sure there are people out there who aren't going to validate those feelings, but they are 100% valid. And I don't even know your dad like that. Like, I remember him from when I was a kid, but I don't even know him like that. So it's not even like I'm sitting here like, yeah, he sucks. But I know what your experience has been in the relationship and how hurtful and harmful that piece of it has been. And so, as someone who loves you and is on your team, like, you are totally valid for making the choice that you made. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you.
No, it is incredibly validating and it is so hard in a good way to hear those types of things. And I do think that it is hard when society requires or heavily demands that we provide concessions constantly for our
Mm.
parents and for our family members.
Well,
So
there's a
yeah.
certain extent of like our parents also have to love us for who we are and not who they thought we should be or what they expect
Right.
us to be.
Right. And again, that goes to the whole unconditional love thing. It felt very conditional. Like if I am not this person that acts a certain way or believes certain things, then I am just not worth the time to love. And that
Mm.
sucked. Yeah. Anyways, there are other things of grief that I deal with. And still moving on to that because I've been sad now.
We did it. We broke her. We
Yeah,
did it.
no, for sure. We did it, Joe. She's dead. She's just emotionally done.
I mean, the loss of my mom just happened. This is also a very new experience with you and your dad and going non-contact. Again, we could talk about how society views that. You see a lot of parents who their children have gone non-contact and then they're making TikToks like it's not my fault. Like that is definitely its own complicated experience that people don't always understand or always see all the sides to.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I completely forgot about those type of like TikToks where it's like my kids don't talk to me anymore and they're just entitled and that's. And I'm like, okay, well, first and foremost, they're your kids. So you raise them. Who they've turned into is partly your fault. Whether or not they decided, yeah, I'm going to be absolutely nothing like you because you're fucking batshit, or you're the best person in the world. I want to be just like my mom, like that type of thing. It is interesting because it does seem like it is becoming more of a generational thing where there's a lot of people our age that are more understanding of that situation. That is good, but I also think that is also due to more conversations being around mental health and prioritizing
Mm.
those things, which I am
Yeah.
grateful for. I would say another experience with grief that I've had that it's not due to a present loss, but like a potential
Mm.
future loss is something that my partner and I have talked about is having kids. And
Yeah.
when this current administration has come in and with everything with Roe v. Wade happening, ultimately I've had to grieve the loss of a future that I had thought of.
Mm.
And that's not to say that we'll never have children or anything like that. But, as of next year, I will be 35. And when you get to that age, I think the politically correct nice way they say it now is it's like a mature pregnancy or something like that. They used to
No,
call
they
it
still call it
geriatric.
geriatric. They
Okay.
still
Yeah.
definitely call it geriatric in the medical
Yeah.
field.
But that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like I had already had my own concerns medically, just with what I've experienced with periods and this, that, and the other, that I was like, oh, I'm afraid there's going to be complications. And I've even had to have the difficult conversation with my partner of like, hey, if it's between me or the baby, keep me. I can make more babies probably. And I also said, if I were to ever get pregnant, that opinion might change, but at my current
Mm,
state, that was my thought. But with everything that's happened, I'm like, so if I have an ectopic pregnancy or if I have
mm,
a miscarriage, because there are times where there are stillborns or miscarriages that don't go all the way through, or
yeah.
from my understanding, and it's like there are women who die from like sepsis or whatever because with Roe v. Wade being overturned, you can't get rid of it
Necessary.
until you're practically dead. And then sometimes when that happens, when you're practically dead, it happens way too fast and then you die. And then there's, "I'm so sorry. Legally, this is all we could do." And so it's like with the health concerns that I already had, as well as my age coming up, as well as everything with Roe v. Wade, I was like, so even if I have children, it could then become a lot riskier, which is intimidating and scary. But to explain that to someone, especially with this political climate, it's like, that's not the worst thing in the world. I'm not
Mm,
saying that. I'm saying I'm scared. I'm saying I
yeah.
had this idea of what I wanted, and now I don't know if I'm even going to get it.
Mm,
If I do, what it's going to look like now, because am I going to have to be bedridden for 3 months because I'm too fucking old and I'm in my 40s now because that's how long it took for that to happen? Like a couple months or like a month ago, I had a really hard time with that and that realization because like there are people who like my mom in particular has said I knew I always wanted to be a mother. That was
mm,
always like she's like I never cared. I think if I'm recalling this correctly, I'm sure she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but she's like, I didn't really care what I did for work. I just knew that I wanted to be a mother. That was the thing I wanted. And to some degree, that wasn't 100% me. Like, I knew that I had always wanted to be a mom, but that wasn't my bread and butter. I wanted to do other things and be a mother as well. And just having that be kind of taken away,
mm.
I wouldn't say 100% unexpectedly, because with this administration, there's been a plan in motion for years at this point, but it's still a
Yeah.
shock.
Well, and when we talk about the future and having kids, I'm with your mom. All I ever wanted to do was be a mom. I don't remember ever like really thinking about a husband or a partner or
Because
anything
you don't
like
need no
that.
man.
I don't need a man. I just need them babies, right? And so I'm 37 and have not had kids. And so there's grief of having to think about too, like, okay, because of my age, I can't have 10 kids. Like what I thought I wanted when I was young was like as many kids as I could possibly pop out. Like that's not really an option at this point, right? Not to say I couldn't have more than one kid, just
Also, though,
mathematically.
in this economy,
Well,
girl.
that's very true. I always said as many kids as I could afford.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
too. Yeah, like so having to grieve like logically, mathematically, physically, there's no way that I could have 10 kids now, even if I wanted to, unless I'm like pop out a bunch of multiples. You know what I mean? Like it's just not a realistic thing to think of. So like having to deal with that grief of like that's not gonna look the same, or even because we're older, like what is that gonna mean for me seeing my grandkids someday? If I have a kid now, like doing that math in my head, like, okay, if I have a kid now and they have a kid by the time they're 20, then I'll only be in my late 50s. So that'll still work out okay. But if my kid decides to wait until they're almost 40, then I'm going to be like 80. And then what? Like, will I even be here in 40 years to be able to see my grandkids? So like that stuff definitely, those things that we hoped for ourselves when we were younger, or even in starting a relationship, it can really change because of life, times, and external things, not just my biological clock, but like you said, the government, things like that. I talked to my spouse about everything going on in the world and politics, and I have an escape plan. If things get crazy, we're going to New Zealand. I have a green job role so I can like get a visa more easily than some other people can because of the work I do, because it's in the health field. Already thought through all of this. And I think about that about getting pregnant too. Like, if I'm pregnant and things are still going the way they are, maybe I'll just go to New Zealand to get better care. Like, maybe that would just be a better thing for our kid because of the way things are. And it's also hard because we grew up in the 90s, the last century, and there was like an idealism, and people were still having kids when they were like 20, 22. Not that people don't do that now. There's like an idealism that isn't necessarily realistic for
Yeah.
us at this point with a lot of things, but it comes with, yeah, children and just the way we expected our lives to look by the time we were in our mid to late 30s, thinking we could have owned a house and we have a few kids and all of these things. Well, for lots of different reasons, that's not the way it worked out. And so having to sort of grieve that dream we had, like in Les Mis, what's the song? I Dreamed a Dream.
Ah, yes.
That's kind of
Yes,
like the
yes.
whole point of that song is like, this is what I imagined life would be. And it's not any of those things. It actually, for her, was very terrible. I'm not comparing myself to that character. I'm not going through those things. But, it's that I dreamed a dream, and we have to grieve the loss of those dreams sometimes, for sure. It's hard to grieve the loss of these ideas for what we think our life is going to look like. And part of that happens as we're growing up, as things are happening. Like, I think back to when our grandmother died and thinking about, when she was sick and when our grandpa was sick, and what that looked like and how it affected not just each of us as individuals, but also how it affected us as a family. And I think the same way with my mom, it affects the larger family dynamic as well, because
Oh, yeah.
grandma was our matriarch. And when she passed, I think there was a lot of ways that my mom sort of stepped into that role. My mom might have been stepping into that role even before grandma died. So then it's like we're losing a matriarch. How is that going to affect the way that we are together? How is that going to affect like the relationship between me and my brothers, even my relationship between me and the aunts and uncles? My mom was that bridge. Losing a person can be hard because it's not just your grief experience, it's everybody's grief experience, and how that changes all sorts of different dynamics. So just a quick thing, I want to share this picture with you. This is my favorite picture of our grandma. Can you see it? So that's
That's
her
amazing.
taking a Jello shot at the FOE, with her wig on, and it was slightly tipping back. You can see a little bit that it's slightly tipping back, and that's one of my favorite pictures of our grandma. I keep her up on my little like memorial shelf, and we can talk more about memorializing later, but I know that you've said before, like, you don't necessarily remember a ton about her, and so I imagine it's also difficult to be like around like our family where like half of us or like a chunk of us really remember her well, and then there's like a chunk of people who don't.
So kind of talking to some degree about memorializing. There will be times where I'm talking to my cousins who live down here. They're like 20 years older than me. So they knew grandma a lot more than I did, because I think she passed when I was like a preteen,
That was like
ultimately.
2012. Oh, no, no,
Something
no.
like
Sorry,
that.
sorry, sorry. 2005, I mean.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. So then I was 14. That makes sense. Yeah. So, okay. A little bit older. That's the thing, is in my head, I'm way younger than that when she passed. But either way, like, because there was 1,000 of us, I think by the time she got to my sister and I with grandkids, she's like, okay, I'm all right. Watch Jeopardy. Watch, oh God, what's the one where you spin the wheel and put the letters on the board?
Wheel of Fortune?
Wheel of Fortune. That's it. Yeah, those were like the main ones. We would watch those
That's because she
two,
didn't
and
have
then
cable.
ABC News was always on her like 60 Minutes or whatever. But yeah, so it was like there are like other memories I have with her, but it was like for the most part, it was like, watch that TV, eat your chicken patty sandwich or your pizza, and just chill.
Where your Schwan dinner was.
Oh
Like
yeah.
your dinner
Trying to
from
explain
Schwan.
schwans to people down here, they have no idea what
Shout
it
out to
is.
Schwan. Is that still a thing? Do
It is
people,
still a thing
is
because
it?
I Googled it. It is. It's weird, but yeah. So relating to them, they would have conversations, or they would like talk to me about things that grandma would do. And I'm like, she sounds really cool. I didn't know that lady. Like, that's not the
Wow.
grandma that I knew. So there's a couple different things that are kind of like takeaways for me in relationship to her passing and to even grandpa passing. So when grandpa was passing, I think he had Alzheimer's
Yeah,
or
yeah.
dementia. So one of those where it really impacted the memories.
Yeah.
And another key thing to know about our family, or at least my mom with our family, was like hug everybody goodbye.
Mm.
And it was very hard for me because he passed away before grandma. So when he was passing, it was very hard because mom would be like, okay, well, hug grandpa goodbye. And I'm like, this man doesn't know me. Why would I hug?
Mm.
Like, I know he's my grandpa, but why would I hug him? I don't understand that. Like, it just was incredibly frustrating because it just was weird. As a child and not understanding fully what was going on, it was very hard for me to do that. And so then when he passed, I felt extremely guilty. So then when grandma was passing, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm always there. Another thing, again, that I noticed as well is that we're talking about things that are hard to talk about with a family who doesn't like to talk about hard things.
Yeah.
And so that friction that comes with that. And so you're kind of, at least with me, it felt like I was kind of left alone with trying to maneuver these big emotions. And doing my best when grandma was dying, that I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to be there as much as I can, just be with her. Even when she got to the point where she was literally just lying in the recliner, I'm like,
Mm.
I'm gonna try to hug her, kiss her hand or cheek or whatever, do things that I'm supposed to do just so that she knows that I love her.
Yeah.
So with the two of them dying, but especially with Grandpa dying, I don't handle death well. And so I want to apologize to you because I probably did not handle your mother's death as well as I could have, but I knew that because I don't handle it well, that you did not need that around you.
Yeah.
I hate that I couldn't be there for you, but I didn't want to be that burden for you. And so if you felt alone, I am very sorry. I
No.
love you very
Like,
dearly.
oh, babe, I love you too. I did not feel that way at all. First of all, there's plenty of people to be there, like literally.
Right.
But also like I have a really good support system and I needed space during that time. So I think you picked up on that I wasn't really trying to necessarily have conversations like that, which worked well because you were like, I'm not trying to put all this stuff on her, but no,
Right.
you asked me what I needed. I told you I need memes, funny memes,
Yes.
and you sent
Yes.
me funny memes, and that was a good respite from all of the things that sort of went on. And, and I should say as well that, I don't think my mom would have begrudged anyone dealing with the experience the way they did, right? She wouldn't have want to put anybody out. So people who are like, I'm sorry I didn't make it to the funeral, I'm like, look, I can already tell you she would have been like, it's fine. Don't worry. Don't waste your time on a Friday to come over and see my funeral. Like, don't even bother, right? So, like, trying to make sure people know that as well. Like, she knew how much she was loved by the family at large and how much she loved the family at large and would not begrudge anyone for whatever their experience after her death was. And I feel the same way. I fear sometimes that I make it sound like my mom was like I'm idealizing her role in our family. But my mom was a
Mhm.
big deal. She took care of a lot of things and was
Oh, yeah.
involved in everybody's everything. And so, again, why I sort of compare this to the loss of grandma is this very big matriarchal character in our family. Losing that was something that was so difficult and honestly brought some people out of the woodwork, like people I hadn't seen in ages, even like
Your
my
brother.
brother's ex well, my brother's ex-wife was there. Both the ex-wives of my brothers were there. I think
Mhm.
all the ex-wives made appearances, I think. Or like our cousins that lived far, our
Mhm.
cousin from California came in, our step cousins, some of them I haven't seen in absolute ages, came. Back to what you were saying though, you are absolutely fine. I knew that if I needed you, you would be there. And really what I did need from you was respite and was like the laughing and the memes and those sort of things and to not have to talk about my mom. So I hope that wasn't hard for you that we never really talked about it. But that's why for your wedding, it was really important to me to bring my mom there. So, okay, after my grandma passed and then after my mom passed, our family has done this thing where we get bears sort of made of their clothes and they're like little stuffies. So I brought my mom stuffy to your wedding because I knew how important it would have been for her to be there. And that was something that felt so important for me to make sure you could know and see on the day, not to make it about the fact that she wasn't there or about the loss, but to make sure you and your mom and all of the family like felt her presence even though she wasn't there. And that's really what I'm trying to do with my life too, is trying to act from that place of how do I honor my mom most. I think that's part of moving forward too after a loss, is figuring out ways to process things and memorialize. I'm sorry. Okay.
No, no, you're great. But before we move forward about moving forward, you saw the handkerchief or you were aware of the handkerchief I had on the day of my
Oh
wedding,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that was also part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for my something borrowed was a handkerchief that our grandma had used and then your mom had used. And my mom presented it to me before the ceremony. And there are pictures of me with my fabulously long nails, like going like this because I'm trying not to A, poke myself in the eye and also not ruin my makeup. And she's like, I didn't mean to make you cry. I was like, my aunt who has just passed and my grandmother who's been gone a minute, you're giving me something that both of them had so they can be here with me. And you think I wouldn't cry? The fuck is wrong with you?
I
Like
didn't
I
know
was,
she was gonna do it on the day of.
oh, yes, there are, she wanted pictures of it. She wanted
Oh
pictures
my
of her
gosh.
presenting this to me as she's like reading from the like thing of like something old, something new. And then to give some context, my bouquet I had made, and it was a brooch bouquet, but the handle of it was actually a sword that I had cut up and stabbed the styrofoam with. And so in the handle is where I put the handkerchief. And so
Mm,
literally in almost every picture, I had my bouquet, which meant I had grandma and your mom with me in
yeah.
every picture, which was amazing. It definitely is things like that that I think help with memorializing as well
Mm,
as moving forward because it's like remembering people obviously will cause some pain, but there is a moment of feeling, like I said, I cried when that happened, but it also, I felt such a warm feeling having them with me.
yeah. Well, and that's it. Like I said, that picture I showed you of grandma, that
It was
I have
amazing.
like a little shelf that I have a memorial. Here's my mom too. This is her graduation photo.
I have never seen her
Um,
with long hair a day in her life.
no, by the time we came around, she was already, all of the aunts were in that short 90s mom phase. That picture of my mom, the picture of grandma, a couple other people we've lost, pregnancy that we couldn't carry to term and lost. And so I have like a little thing for her up there. So my friends, I just made a candle, a workouting that was like make a candle. And so I specifically tried to make a candle to remind me of mom. So I don't know if you remember, but at the farm, at grandma's farm, there was a big lilac bush next to the driveway, right at the curve of the driveway, probably long gone. And those memories are barely there, let alone the actual lilac bush at this point. But so lilac always really reminded me of grandma, something that mom and I shared as like a memory of grandma. So I made a candle that had a lilac scent in it. Before she passed, I asked her what her favorite color was, and she was like, I don't know, I guess red. And so I've got like a red candle holder, made this whole little candle for her. So I have that to burn to think of her. I've got the pictures to have, and I'm making scrapbooks, having all of these little ways that we can remember those positives and keep them in our line of sight and in our thoughts and minds, but in a positive way. It doesn't always have to be mourning, right? I think it's easy to think of grief and how we deal with it as mourning and missing out on the fact that it can also be joyful. It can also be a great picture of them sculling back a jello shot, you know. It can also be these really positive ways that we remember and continue to process and soothe our sort of grief. You know, I think people get caught up in the idea of what grief should look like, but we have to remember it's not logical, and it sure as heck isn't linear, and it doesn't look a specific way, and we have to be okay with that. So even what I was saying earlier, like I expected her 1 year was May 2nd, here we are on May 11th, which is Mother's Day. I should be a mess, but I'm not. Even sitting here talking, I've loved sitting here and talking to you about this. But even this, I imagined was gonna be something that made me like really cry, and I haven't. I just feel positive about it. It's weird, not what I expected, but also not a bad thing to walk away from it like that, and that proof of grief is different for different people, and we have to make sure that we don't judge ourselves or others about what that experience is. And that's not only about validating someone's feelings, that is super important, but it's also about being open-minded about what that journey can look like for other people, but really for ourselves, being prepared for trying to set ourselves up for success, even though we can't ever really know what we're going to need and when we're going to need it.
And I will say there are times as well where, especially when like grief is happening like very hard, like when someone just passes or something like that, I have found difficulty in the fact that it's like, again, comparison is not ideal, but it's just like, well, there are people suffering far worse than me. I've just lost this person. They're losing tons and tons of loved ones due to war, or, the fact of the matter is, I am very sad. I am in this extreme grief. I still have to pay taxes. I still have to go to work. And
Yeah.
trying to navigate that and push through that is so incredibly hard. And grief isn't linear and it isn't logical, because sometimes it's just like, you know what? I need to do this right now. There are some people that are like, I need to feel this grief. I need to do whatever. I feel like to some degree, some of our family members, it's like, give me something to work on. I will focus all of my energy into this. I will not feel these
Oh, yeah.
feelings. You mean I need to focus on this project for work? I will absolutely do that. The whole time heals all wounds. I'm like, you can go fuck yourself at that, because absolutely not. Like I said, there's times where it's like, even in the most innocuous things, like I'll see a YouTube video of woodworking, or I'll see it of these people camping in this gorgeous, gorgeous place. And I'm like, my dad's dad, my grandfather on that side has also passed. Grandpa would have loved this. If he would have learned what YouTube is, there are just certain things that I'm like, he would have loved to have seen this and learned that. And there's a moment of sadness. And then there's a way to be like, I can do these things and make him proud, even though he's no longer with us. And there's that connection that I feel with the memorializing, with just existing. That's nice. But I'm like, for him, it's been 3 years since he's passed. And there are even times grandma's passed now more than 2 decades.
Almost, yeah, just about 20 years.
Jeez. So it's, almost 2 decades that she's been gone. And there are still times where I feel like I smell her, or there's something that happens that makes me think of her. And I mourn her death, but then I also mourn the fact that I don't get to know her now. And that sucks. So it's just doing what you can with everything, I think, is like the biggest thing that I've tried to learn and overcome. It's just like, it's okay to feel what you feel and how you feel it.
And it's funny that you brought up the like focusing the energy into doing something. That was 100% me. Certainly 2 days afterwards, I was totally going through everything in the house, organizing it, packing it up, trying to get it figured out. And I had talked to, oh man, didn't mention that my mother's husband died roughly 2 months before she did. And so his kids are grieving and going through all this stuff. And I was talking to his daughters and I'm like, listen, I'm going to start going through the house. And they're like, what? And I'm like, it's okay that you guys are not there. I'm not asking you to be there. I'm going to go through the stuff that I know for sure was my mom's. I think we can agree that the kitchen was my mom's because he didn't know how to boil an egg. And then things that I know are specifically hers. And I'm going to go through it. And I'm doing it because it helps me to process. It helps me even to grieve, because then I find moments where I'd find something and it would make me really sad. And I would like take a moment to feel that, or I'd look at the pictures, which there were bins and bins and bins of pictures. That's very much our family, and going through all that stuff. So yeah, sometimes it is like, I'm going to use this anxiety, this grief to like fuel me to do something else. And it doesn't have to necessarily be in a way of avoidance. It can be in a way of focusing that energy. But we also have to be thoughtful that some people are just going to lie in bed and not be able to turn that grief and those feelings into energy. And frankly, I had moments of that as well. Maybe that speaks to other mental health issues I have. But again, finding what is going to work for you and what is going to feel best for you in processing the grief, in memorializing the grief, in every aspect of that. Some people want to put things that remind them of that person away. Some people want to put them on display. Some people want to talk about them. Some people want to not have to necessarily face that subject most of the time. Some people want to cry, some people want to scream, some people shut down. Like, it looks totally different, and it can look totally different day to day for you. That's also a part of it, is yes, the grace and space to allow yourself to grieve, but also understanding there's no set way it's going to happen every single time. It'll get you on that random Tuesday because I smelled lilacs, or It might get me when I watch Fried Green Tomatoes because it's a sad movie, and also it's a movie I watched with my mom. Oh, maybe I can speak on how I memorialized my mom for her first anniversary. That was part of it. I ended up doing that at the end of the night. I watched Fried Green Tomatoes, which also has a death by cancer in it. So
Oh,
that definitely kept those tears going. If there was nothing else that would have done it. But I went on a walk. I took my mom bear with me and sat. We have a lot of like forest preserves, nature preserves, and stuff around. I sat and sort of just talked out loud to my mom and saying about how much I missed her, recognizing that there are things that I might still be angry about, not just
mm,
about her death, but about our lives, about things that happened in the past, traumas, things like that. Even recognizing that those things are never going to not be part of our story together, my mom and I. Like, yes, we overcame them. By the time she passed, the strongest we've ever been. Love my mom unconditionally so much, but there's still shit that has happened in our past, and that
yeah.
even if she was here, she couldn't change or fix or make a difference on, but that affected who I am and how my brain developed and what my life was like. So I even took time to be a little, not angry. Again, I'm talking out loud to just the
Right.
world and, my mom's spirit, if or wherever she is. Even taking that time to acknowledge, like, there's hurt that's still inside me that
Mm,
is not healed, not just about your passing, but about things that have happened in my life. And there's no way for me to fully remember my mother without remembering some of those things and how it changed me. And then, therefore, how it changed my relationship with my mom and all of those things. Some of what I was saying was just, I'm missing you, I'm loving you. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this without you. But there were also a lot of memories that were coming to me from my teenage years and my childhood. I was sort of giving myself that space to express that too. Like, I felt alone. This is how I felt in those times. I know that's not what you wanted, but that was my valid feeling of those times and those things. So really giving myself that. And of course, I cried my sweet little eyes out. And yeah, there were a few crying during the evening. I used some pressed flowers and made a thing with a picture of my mom and did like an art project that was like my mom focused because I was feeling the creative energy coming for it. Sat outside, tried to enjoy nature even after I came back from my walk. And then Fried Green Tomatoes was the movie I watched. I guess I want to share that because that's what a day of memorializing looked like for me. But I had no idea that's what it was going to look like before I got there. I didn't plan any of that. I just sort of was like, let's just go with the flow and like figure it out as we go. And it wasn't all positive, but it wasn't all negative. It was a full spectrum. And I think that's what a lot of people sort of miss sometimes. They get very stuck in either it's got to be the sadness or it's got to be the joyful remembering. And it's like, it is all of those things. Because especially when we're talking about the loss of a loved one, like, they were a human. Our relationship with them wasn't perfect. And them dying doesn't mean suddenly our relationship was perfect and we don't remember any of those things. So really giving ourselves a space to get that full spectrum of all of those things that can come to us when we're thinking about the person that we lost or the idea that we lost, whatever it is that we're sort of grieving. Again, it's very much about figuring it out for yourself and allowing yourself to express however it comes. So it's about grief, and all of us knowing that that experience is always going to be different from us. And it a lot of times is going to be hard. And remembering that our lives are all very different, and there are lots of times when our lives are hard. But what we are trying to make sure you hear from us here today and every day is talking about mental health shouldn't be hard.